I remember the hum of the city that night. It was a Friday, one of those evenings when the world outside glows with promise, yet inside something feels off. I sat alone in my car, parked in front of the tall glass building that used to feel like home, the company I'd given 7 years of my life to. That night, it didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a memory that didn't want me back. My name's Ethan Cole. Until a few weeks ago, I was the senior project manager at North Point Dynamics, a high-end software firm in downtown Chicago. I was good, loyal, disciplined, maybe even too trusting, and I had a wife, Laura, who I believed was my anchor through every storm. Together, we'd built a life of quiet stability, a modest apartment, late-night dinners, shared dreams at least. That's what I thought that night. As I stared at the reflection of the building's bright logo in my windshield, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Mark, my boss, and supposedly my closest friend. "Greater than Ethan, I need you to stop by the office before Monday. We need to talk about the restructuring." Restructuring. That single word hit like a whisper from a loaded gun. I'd heard rumors, layoffs, position cuts, silent promotions, but not once did I think I'd be the one standing in the line of fire. I'd been the one pulling on, saving clients, covering for Mark's mistakes. Still, I went. The building was mostly empty when I walked in, just the low hum of machines and distant city traffic filling the silence. I passed the reception desk, the glass doors, and the reflection of a man who already looked tired of believing in people. Mark was there in his office, sleeves rolled up, tie loose, and a drink in his hand. He smiled when he saw me, but it wasn't the kind of smile friends share. It was the kind of smile people wear when they've already made up their minds. "Ethan," he said, voice calm, rehearsed. "Take a seat." I sat down, even though every instinct told me not to. He leaned back in his chair. "I'll get straight to it. The board's decided to move in a different direction. We're letting you go." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "You're kidding, right?" After everything I've done, he raised his hand. "It's not personal. Not personal." That's what they always say right before they stab you in the back and tell you it's just business. I clenched my fists, trying to stay composed. "You said restructuring, not firing." Mark's eyes didn't waver. "There's no easy way to say this. Your role's been filled, permanently filled." "By who?" He hesitated, and in that pause, that quiet, deliberate pause, my entire world tilted. "Laura," he said finally. For a moment, I didn't understand. My brain refused to connect the words. "My wife?" I whispered. He nodded once, almost casually. "She's been consulting with us for a while now. The board thinks she's better suited for the leadership structure we're building." I stood up so fast, the chair fell back. The room suddenly felt smaller, heavier. I wanted to speak, to yell, to demand an explanation, but my throat had turned to stone. "She told me you were struggling," Mark added, pretending to sound regretful. "That you've been distracted lately." "I'm sorry, Ethan, truly." He wasn't sorry, not even close. I left without another word. I walked out of that building, down the silent corridor, past the people who once nodded respectfully when I walked by, and for the first time, they couldn't even meet my eyes. Outside, the rain had started, and I let it fall cold. Relentless, honest. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't. The thought of facing her, the woman I'd loved, trusted, built everything for, was unbearable. I drove aimlessly through the city, past flickering neon lights, diners closing up, strangers walking hand in hand. Each one of them looked like they belonged somewhere me. I was just a ghost, floating through the wreckage of his own life. By midnight, I parked near the river. The skyline shimmered above the black water, and somewhere in those reflections, I saw the man I used to be fading away. The only answer was the sound of the rain. I didn't know it then, but that night, the night everything fell apart, was also the night something else began. Quiet storm. A promise I didn't yet understand. The morning after that storm, the city looked the same. But I didn't. Something in me had cracked quietly during the night. Not loud enough for the world to notice, but deep enough that I felt it every time I breathed. I hadn't slept. My phone had buzzed a few times, messages from coworkers, a few from unknown numbers I didn't want to read. But one was from Laura. "Ethan, please don't make this harder. It's for the best. We both needed change. Change." That word had never sounded so cruel. I sat there staring at her message, my hands shaking. She didn't even have the courage to say it in person. 7 years together, and she ended it with a text. I could have ignored it. I could have disappeared. But I needed to understand. So that afternoon, I went back to the office. Not inside, just across the street to see who had replaced me. Through the glass walls of North Point's lobby, I saw them. Laura and Mark. They were standing close to close, going through a presentation. She was dressed in a sharp navy suit, confident, polished, radiant, like she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. Mark stood beside her, whispering something that made her smile. And in that instant, I realized this wasn't just betrayal, it was a plan. She hadn't moved on, she'd moved up. I felt anger, sharp and raw, but beneath it was something worse. Clarity. They'd been working together long before. I ever saw it coming. As I watched them through the glass, a man walked up beside me, tall, mid-40s, wearing an overcoat that looked expensive but old, like someone who used to have more than he does now. "You one of them?" he asked. I turned, startled. "What?" He nodded toward the building. "North Point, you look like you belong to that world." "Used to," I said. He chuckled softly. "Yeah, me too." I frowned. "You worked there?" He nodded. 5 years. "In accounting." Until Mark found a reason to cut me out. I looked at him properly for the first time. "His name tag still pinned to his coat," said Peter Lawson. "Let me guess," I said quietly. "He said it wasn't personal." Peter laughed. "You too, huh?" Then his expression shifted. Serious now. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last. The guy's been manipulating everyone for years. He uses people, drains them, replaces them, always with someone who owes him." I felt something twist inside me. That meant Laura didn't just fall for him. She was in debt to him. Maybe career-wise. Maybe emotionally. "I didn't know yet," Peter continued. "He's smart, though. Knows how to make his hands look clean. If you're thinking of fighting back, don't. You can't win against someone like him." I didn't answer. My mind was already spinning because the thing about people like Mark is they build their power on the assumption that others will play fair. But I was done playing fair that night. I started gathering everything I could remember about North Point. Old emails, contracts, client reports, every little detail Mark had ever brushed under the rug. I wasn't sure what I was looking for yet. Maybe proof of something illegal. Maybe just a crack in his perfect image. But I knew one thing. If karma was real, I was going to help it find its way. Days turned into weeks. I stayed quiet, invisible. While they posted smiling photos on company pages, I watched from the shadows. Patient. Then one evening, Peter called me. His voice was low, urgent. "Ethan, I think I found something." He sent me a document, an internal audit report, buried inside. I saw it, a client invoice discrepancy worth over $300,000. And guess whose digital signature approved it? Mark's. It was subtle, the kind of thing you could explain away if no one looked too closely. But if someone did look closely, it could ruin him. My heart raced. That was the moment I realized I had something stronger than revenge. A hot truth. Still, I hesitated. There was a part of me that wanted to confront him, to throw the evidence in his face and watch him squirm. But another part, the colder, wiser part, whispered, "No, don't warn him. Let him think he's safe." So, I waited. For weeks. I let the plan build quietly, like thunder gathering on the horizon. As I was reviewing more files, I noticed something else. Laura's name appeared on one of the approval chains. She wasn't innocent. She'd helped process the fake invoice. And suddenly, everything made sense. Mark hadn't just taken my job or my wife. He'd used her. Too, he'd made her part of his corruption. Staring at the screen, for the first time since that night, I didn't feel pain. I felt purpose because now I knew exactly how karma would walk in, and I'd be the one holding the door open. There's a strange kind of calm that comes when pain finally runs out. It's not peace, not yet. It's something colder, like standing in the eye of a storm, watching everything else spin around you. That's where I was broken, yes, but no longer bleeding. After discovering the fraudulent invoices, I knew what I had to do. Revenge wasn't about rage anymore. It was about precision, about letting truth do the cutting for me. So I built a plan, a quiet, deliberate plan, something that would make Mark and Laura crumble under the weight of their own choices. I started by contacting a few of my old clients, people I'd worked with directly. People who trusted me more than they trusted North Point. One of them, Angela Porter, had always been kind. She ran a small startup that North Point had overbilled years ago. I told her to check her old records. A day later, she called me back. "Ethan," she said, "I checked the numbers. You were right. They charged me 30 grand more than the contract said. But why are you bringing this up now?" I hesitated, then answered, "Because I think they've done it to others too." There was silence on the line, then a low, careful tone. "I know someone at the City Financial Review Board. If you're serious about this, I can connect you." I'd never been more serious about anything in my life, but I also knew one thing. If Mark even got a hint that I was investigating him, he'd cover his tracks in seconds, so I had to move like a ghost for weeks. I lived a double life. By day, I was invisible, a laid-off worker, quietly applying for new jobs, pretending to rebuild by night. I was a shadow following every digital footprint North Point left behind. Peter became my partner in silence. We met in an old diner near the river, the kind where the coffee tastes like rust and the walls remember secrets. He'd bring printouts. I'd bring questions, and together we pieced together the puzzle each night. The picture grew darker. Fake vendor accounts, funds redirected through dummy corporations, and at the center of it all, Mark's approval codes, disguised under executive overrides. Laura's name appeared often but always as the verifier, the one who confirmed transactions without asking questions. It hit me one night, as I looked at her digital signature on another shady document. Maybe she didn't even know how deep she was in. Maybe Mark had promised her career growth, leadership, and trust, all the same words he'd once used on me. But then I remembered her message. It's for the best. We both needed change. No doubt she knew. That realization hardened something in me. Revenge wasn't just about Mark anymore. It was about justice for everyone he'd used, including me. Then came the opportunity. Angela introduced me to Daniel Reeves, an investigator from the City Review Board. We met at a quiet cafe outside town. Daniel was sharp, mid-50s, calm eyes, the kind of man who had seen too many schemes to be easily fooled. The fake invoices, the signatures, the trail Peter and I uncovered. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he simply said, "Send me everything you have, quietly, and don't contact them again." That was it. The plan was now in motion. Still, every night, I found myself checking North Point's updates, press releases, photos, interviews. One evening, they announced a corporate gala celebrating a decade of innovation and integrity. Integrity, the irony almost made me laugh. Mark and Laura were hosting it. Together, the power duo behind North Point's success. It was perfect. If karma had a sense of drama, this was it. I started planning my move not to crash their party, but to time it. If the investigation report landed on the right desk, on the right night, everything would collapse in front of the entire business community. Mark would have no idea what hit him. Laura would finally see the kind of empire she'd chosen to stand beside and watch it crumble in her own hands. But fate, as it often does, wasn't done testing me yet. 2 days before the gala, my phone buzzed again, a number I didn't recognize. I almost ignored it until I saw the message. "Ethan, I need to explain. Laura." I stared at the screen for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it, pretend she didn't exist. But another part, the part that still remembered her laugh, her touch, her promises, wanted answers. So, I replied, "Greater than tomorrow, 8 p.m. The River Diner." Peter saw the message and frowned. "You sure about this? She could be setting you up." "I need to hear it," I said. Not for her. For me, that night, the diner felt colder than usual. I sat in our usual booth, the one by the window. The streetlights painted long golden stripes across the table. She arrived late in a gray coat, hair tied back, eyes restless. When she saw me, she hesitated, then sat down slowly for a moment. Neither of us spoke. Then she said softly, "You look thinner." I almost laughed. "You look busy." She flinched. "Ethan, I didn't mean for things to happen this way." "Really?" I asked quietly, "because it looks like you meant every part of it." Tears welled in her eyes. "Mark said you were losing focus, that the company needed stability." You didn't realize he'd fire me and put you in my place." She looked down. Silence. That silence told me everything. Finally, she whispered, "He's not who you think he is. He's dangerous." I leaned forward. Dangerous how? But before she could answer, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her face going pale. "It's him," she said under her breath. "He knows I'm here." And just like that, she grabbed her purse and left, rushing out into the rain, disappearing into the night. I sat there, frozen for the first time. I felt something I hadn't felt before. Fear? Maybe Mark wasn't just corrupt. Maybe he was something darker, and I'd just stepped deeper into his game than I. The next morning, the city felt different. The air was heavy, like the sky itself was holding its breath. I hadn't slept. Laura's words kept echoing in my head. He's not who you think he is, but who was he really? Mark had always been charming, too charming. The kind of man who could convince you the sun rises just to see him smile. He knew how to talk, how to read people, how to hide behind confidence. But if Laura was scared, that meant something else, something real. I sat in my apartment, laptop open, notes scattered across the table. My phone buzzed. "Peter again. You okay?" he asked. "Not sure," I said quietly. "Laura reached out, said Mark's dangerous." Peter sighed. "I told you. The man plays dirty. I heard rumors he blackmails board members, hides evidence in offshore accounts. He's been untouchable for years." "Not for long," I murmured. Peter hesitated. "Be careful, Ethan. If he finds out what we're doing, he won't," I said, cutting him off. "We're too close now." But part of me wasn't sure anymore. Later that day, I walked downtown to clear my head. Crowds moved like rivers of sound, horns, footsteps, chatter. I passed by a billboard advertising the North Point Gala, flashing both their faces side by side. Mark and Laura. Smiles, perfect lies. For a long time, there's something haunting about watching the people who broke you being celebrated for it. As I looked at that billboard, I didn't feel anger. I felt resolve. They had built their empire on deceit. I was going to make sure the world finally saw what it was really made of. That evening, I got a call from Daniel Reeves, the investigator. His voice was calm, but I could hear the tension beneath it. "Ethan, I reviewed the documents you sent. You were right, the fraud runs deep. We've opened an internal case, but I need one last thing to finalize it. Proof of the financial trail." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "Transactions leading to Mark's personal account, something that connects him directly." I leaned back in my chair. "That won't be easy, I know," Daniel said, "but if you get it, he's finished." When the call ended, I sat there in silence, heart pounding. That was it. The final piece, but there was only one place to find it, inside. North Point system. Breaking into the company network wasn't something I ever thought I'd do, but I still had my old login credentials. Temporary access to an archived system. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get me close. I worked through the night, cross-referencing, encrypted files, pulling old data caches. Around 3 a.m., I found it a hidden ledger tucked beneath layers of authorization codes, and there it was. Multiple wire transfers from a consulting partner account to a private offshore fund recipient. M. Andrews, Mark Andrews. The amounts matched the missing funds in the audit. Report, Sensuan. Wasn't the only theft, there were millions, but something else caught my eye. Laura's digital signature appeared again, verifying every single payment. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Maybe she hadn't just been caught in his web. Maybe she was part of it. But then, I noticed the TIMES, TAMPS. All her approvals came within minutes of Mark's authorization. She didn't know what she was signing. Was she manipulated? Threatened? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. She was in danger. The next day, as I was heading out, I noticed a black car parked near my apartment. It wasn't there before. Tinted windows. Engine running? Coincidence? Maybe. But when I stepped outside, the car pulled away slowly, not speeding, not hiding, just watching. My stomach tightened. Was Mark keeping tabs on me? I called Peter. "You notice anything weird lately?" He hesitated. "Actually, yeah. A guy's been hanging around the diner. Says he's from an insurance company, asking questions about you." "Insurance company, right?" I exhaled. He knows, Peter cursed under his breath. Ethan, you need to lay low. But I couldn't if I disappeared now. Everything I'd worked for would vanish with me. That evening, I went to the office building one last time. The gala was the next night. Banners were being hung, lights tested, staff rushing around in formal wear. Through the glass, I saw Mark talking to a journalist, laughing, confident as ever. He looked untouchable, invisible in the crowd outside, thinking, he doesn't know, not yet. Tomorrow night, his kingdom would collapse. But that night, something unexpected happened. At midnight, I got another message from an unknown number again. Greater than Ethan, don't go to the gala. You're in danger. No name. Just that. I typed back immediately. Greater than who is this? No reply. A chill ran through me. Was it Laura? Was she trying to protect me? Or protect him? Either way, it was too late. If karma was finally walking in, I was going to be there to see it. The night of the gala arrived like a storm dressed in elegance. Rain tapped lightly against my window as the city glittered in gold and glass. I stood in front of the mirror, tightening my tie, my reflection looking back at me like a stranger. It had been months since I'd set foot inside North Point, but tonight, I wasn't just walking in as Ethan Cole, the man they'd destroyed. I was walking in as the truth they'd tried to bury. The North Point Annual Gala was the event of the year. Every major investor, partner, and executive in the city would be there. Mark had turned it into his personal stage, a place to flaunt his success, to show the world his version of perfection. I arrived just before 8. The lobby shimmered with marble floors and crystal chandeliers. The air smelled of expensive perfume and ambition. As I stepped inside, 1,000 conversations filled the room. Laughter, glasses clinking, fake compliments wrapped in silk smiles, and then, across the room, I saw him, Mark Andrews, tailored suit, easy grin, confident posture, like nothing had ever touched him. Laura stood beside him, radiant but distant, her smile practiced, her eyes lost. For a moment, our eyes met. She froze, then looked away. Something in her expression told me she wasn't at peace. Something inside. Her still remembered. I stayed near the back, blending into the crowd. My plan was simple. Let the presentation begin. Then drop the evidence. Daniel Reeves had already confirmed everything. We'd built a digital timeline. Documents and proof of Mark's offshore laundering. All it needed was the right stage. And tonight, I had one. I made my way toward the sound booth, a discreet corner near the back wall. Inside my pocket was a small drive labeled Truth. It contained every file, every transaction, every falsified record, and a video compilation. Daniel helped me create a story told by data itself. I plugged it into the system, hidden under my sleeve. Then I waited, when Mark finally took the stage. The crowd erupted in applause. He walked up with confidence, waving like a celebrity, thanking donors and praising his team. I watched him speak words smooth, lies even smoother. He talked about ethics, progress, loyalty, the same words he'd used to destroy me. Laura stood near the edge of the stage, clapping softly, her smile trembling. As the applause quieted, I signaled Daniel from across the room. He nodded, and the lights flickered at first. People thought it was a power glitch. Then the big screen behind Mark came to life. But instead of his corporate video, something else began to play. At first, silence. Then the words appeared on the screen. The truth about North Point. Gasps spread through the room. Mark turned, confused. What the... And then, one by one, the files flashed across the screen. Emails, transaction logs, signatures, secret payments, shell companies, each slide more damning than the last. The crowd erupted into whispers. Phones came out. Cameras started recording. Board members looked at each other in shock. And then came the final image, a video clip of Mark transferring funds, time-stamped, with his digital signature attached. Silence total. Absolute silence. Mark froze. His face turned pale. He looked around the room, scanning for who did it, until his eyes found mine. For a long moment, we just stared at each other. The man who stole my life. Standing under the light of his own truth, he started shouting, "This is a setup. Lies. fabricated nonsense. But no one believed him. Security rushed to the stage. The board director, pale and trembling, whispered something to Daniel Reeves, who was already showing them the official verification. It was over. Everything he'd built on deceit collapsed right there. In front of hundreds of witnesses, Laura stood frozen. Tears welled in her eyes, not of guilt, but relief. She looked at me from across the room, mouthing two words I'll never forget: "Thank you." As the chaos grew, I quietly walked out. I didn't need applause. I didn't need an explanation. Justice didn't always roar. Sometimes it whispered quietly, powerfully in the ruins of a man's pride. The rain had stopped. The air smelled cleaner somehow. I walked down the steps into the city lights. Hearing distant shouts from the gala hall behind me, Peter called me minutes later. "Ethan, I saw it on live feed. You actually did it." "Yeah," I said softly. "It's done." He laughed through disbelief. "You're a legend, man. What now?" I paused, looking up at the night sky. "What now?" I repeated. "Maybe peace." But peace wasn't so simple, because later that night, just when I thought it was over, I got a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice whispered on the other end, greater than Ethan. "You don't understand. Mark wasn't working alone," and the line went dead. The night after the gala should have been the night I finally slept in peace, but instead, I sat in darkness, phone in hand, replaying that voice again and again. Greater than Mark wasn't working alone. The words echoed like a riddle I didn't want to solve. Was it Laura? Or someone else entirely? If Mark wasn't the only one, then what had I really uncovered? The next morning, the story was everywhere. North Point CEO exposed in fraud scandal, corporate giant crumbles overnight. Mark Andrews faces investigation. After public data leak, every news anchor said my name. They called me the whistleblower, the hero who stood against corruption. But the truth was, I didn't feel like a hero. Watched? I spent most of that day locked inside my apartment. Blinds down, phone buzzing nonstop, calls from journalists, old colleagues, even family members who hadn't spoken to me in years. Everyone wanted to talk. Everyone wanted the inside story. But all I wanted was silence. Until the doorbell rang, froze. No one knew my address except Peter and Daniel. I looked through the peephole. No one, just a small white envelope on the floor. No return address, just one word written across it. Careful. Inside was a photo. A picture of me from last night, standing outside the gala. The angle was close, too close. Someone had been watching me. My first call was to Daniel Reeves. He picked up instantly. "Daniel, something's wrong. Someone's following me." He didn't sound surprised. "Ethan, listen. We found new evidence this morning. There's another name in the financial web, someone higher up." "What do you mean, higher up?" The North Point fraud wasn't just Mark. He was the front man. Someone else approved the shadow accounts, He hesitated, then said quietly, "The Vice President of the Investors Council, Richard Hale." I remembered that name. Hale was powerful, connected to government funding and corporate oversight. If he was involved, this went way beyond Mark. That evening, Peter came over looking nervous. He tossed his jacket on the couch. "Man, this is serious. You've rattled the whole city." "I didn't mean to start a war," I muttered. He gave a hollow laugh. "You didn't start it. You just finally made it visible." I nodded slowly, but then Peter's tone changed. "Ethan, there's something I need to tell you." I looked up. "What is it?" He hesitated. "I was contacted by someone from Hale's office yesterday. They offered me money to convince you to stay quiet." I stared at him. "I didn't take it," he said quickly. "I swear. But it means they know who we are. They're watching both of us." My stomach dropped. This wasn't over. It had just changed shape. That night, I sat in front of my computer, combing through the files again, this time looking for any sign of Hale's involvement, and there it was, hidden deep in one of the archived transaction trees, a transfer marked with a secondary approval key, a digital ID belonging not to Mark, but to r.hale_001.my. Heart pounded. He was the puppet master. Mark was just the mask, but there was something else, something that froze my blood. Another signature beside Hale's ID 1. I recognized instantly Laura Cole at first. I thought it was a mistake, maybe a forged entry, But as I traced the digital trail, it became clear the account had been verified. From her old access credentials, it wasn't just a coincidence, she'd been in it. From the beginning, the affair, the promotions, the betrayal, it was all connected. My chest tightened. I wanted to scream, to deny it, but the truth was staring right back at me. Laura wasn't just Mark's accomplice. She was the bridge between Mark and Hale. She'd helped them manipulate company funds under the pretense of expedited transfers. The whole time, while I was defending her, while I believed she was trapped, she was cashing loyalty bonuses. My hands troubled. The woman I once loved had destroyed me twice. The next day, I met Daniel in a quiet cafe downtown. He noticed my face and frowned. What happened? I handed him a flash drive. Proof that Laura was involved. It's all there. Daniel looked surprised. You're sure? Her access keys don't lie, I said flatly. He sighed. I'll verify it. But Ethan, you need to be careful. Hale's people have power. If they think you're digging too deep, I'm not backing off, I interrupted. Not after everything. He nodded slowly. I figured you'd say that. Later that night, as I returned home, I found my door slightly open. A faint draft moved through the hallway. I froze. My pulse spiking. Inside, everything looked normal, until I saw the desk, my laptop gone, every file, every document wiped, but sitting where the laptop had been was a single note. It said, "Stop before it stops you." That was when I realized the second betrayal wasn't about Laura or Mark, it was the system itself. Everyone at the top was protecting each other, and I was the one variable they hadn't planned for. But this time, I wasn't going to play defense. They wanted to silence me. Then I'd make sure my voice was heard everywhere, loud enough that it couldn't be erased. I opened a private backup drive I'd hidden weeks ago, a full mirror of my investigation. I uploaded everything anonymously to a secure news channel and scheduled the release for 48 hours later. If anything happened to me, the truth would go public automatically. It wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about justice, even if it came at a price. By the next morning, the city had changed. Not in the way you see on the surface, not with broken windows or protests in the street. No, it was quieter than that, colder, like the air itself was watching. I woke up to a string of missed calls. Daniel, Peter, even an unknown number that kept appearing again and again. And then a message, greater than you've made powerful enemies. They won't let you walk away. I stared at it, heart pounding. I'd expected resistance, but this felt personal. Somewhere in the city, someone was watching every move I made. I called Daniel first. He picked up immediately. Ethan, are you safe? For now, I said. What's happening? He exhaled heavily. After last night's upload test, someone tried to breach the secure network. They failed, but they were tracing the IP back to you. So they know I'm still digging. Yes, and they're scared. That means you're close. He paused before adding, Ethan, you need to leave the city for a while. Let us handle this quietly, I repeated. After everything. No, this isn't over until the truth is everywhere. Daniel sighed. Then you'd better be ready for what's coming. By noon, I was on the move. I packed a small bag, grabbed my backup drives, and left my apartment for good. Every car on the street felt suspicious. Every shadow, a watcher. I made my way to Peter's place, a small flat above a bookstore downtown. He opened the door. Looking pale, Man, you look like hell, he said. Feel like it too. He poured 2 cups of coffee and sat across from me. They came looking for you. My stomach dropped. Who? I don't know. 2 guys in suits. Said they were from the Federal Business Bureau, but they didn't show IDs. They asked questions about your files, your movements, your contacts. Did you tell them anything? He gave me a look. Of course not. But they're serious, Ethan. This isn't corporate politics anymore. It's survival. As the evening fell, I sat by Peter's window, watching the city lights flicker, 1,000 glowing lives moving beneath the same storm I'd stirred up. Do you ever think, I said quietly, that maybe I should have just walked away when I lost my job? Peter shook his head and let him keep everything. No, man, you did what most people are too afraid to do. You stood up. Yay, I murmured. But at what cost? He didn't answer, because we both knew the cost might still be coming. Around midnight, there was a knock at the door. Not the light kind, heavy, deliberate. Peter and I exchanged a glance. He whispered, "Stay back." He walked to the door, peered through the peephole, and froze, then mouthed, "It's Laura." I stood, confused. Before I could react, he unlocked the door. Laura stepped in, drenched from the rain, hair clinging to her face, eyes wild with fear. "Ethan," she whispered, "you have to listen to me. They're coming for you." I stared at her, anger and confusion crashing together. "You have no right to be here." "I know," she said quickly, "and I don't deserve forgiveness. But please, let me explain." Peter crossed his arms. "Explain what?" "That you sold him out. That you worked with, Hele." Her voice cracked. I didn't have a choice. I clenched my fists. "You always had a choice, Laura." She shook her head, trembling. "No, you don't understand. They blackmailed me. Mark found out about my mother's illness, the hospital debt. He said he'd pay for her treatment if I approved the transfers. And if I refused, he'd ruin you first." I stared at her, disbelief softening into a kind of quiet heartbreak. "So you betrayed me to protect me," I said. Tears fell down her face. "I tried to fix it after you left, but when you started investigating again, Hale's men found out. They're tracking you right now." Peter's eyes narrowed. "How do we know you're not setting him up again?" Laura met his gaze, desperate. "Because I brought you this?" She reached into her coat and pulled out a small black flash drive. "Hale's personal ledger," she whispered. "Every offshore transaction, every bribe, every secret account. This is what he's been protecting." I stared at the drive. If it was real, it was the final key, the proof that could end everything. "How did you get it?" I asked. "I used his secretary's ID. He doesn't know yet, but once he finds out," her voice broke, "he'll come for both of us." Before I could reply, Peter's phone buzzed. He looked at it, and his face turned pale. "They're already here," he said quietly. I turned toward the window, a pair of dark cars parked outside. Headlights cutting through the rain. "Go," Laura said urgently. "There's a back exit through the alley. Take the drive and disappear. I'll lead them away." "No," I said firmly. "You've done enough running." She shook her head. "If they catch you, it's over." "Let me do this, Ethan." Before I could argue, she ran out the front door into the rain. Seconds later, shouts echoed down the street. Engines roared. 2 cars peeled out after her. Peter grabbed my arm. "We have to move now." We bolted through the back exit, rain soaking our clothes as we disappeared into the maze of city alleys. Behind us, the night filled with sirens and the faint echo of tires screeching by dawn. We were miles away, hiding in a rundown motel on the city's edge. The flash drive sat between us on the table, glowing faintly under the lamp. "This is it," Peter said. "The truth everyone's been hiding." I nodded, slowly, but it's not over yet, because even as I looked at that tiny piece of plastic, the key to exposing everything I couldn't stop thinking about. Laura, had she made it out? Was she safe? Or had I just lost her all over again? That morning, I turned to Peter and said, "We end this tomorrow." I looked down at the flash drive, by making sure the whole world sees what Hale built and who he destroyed to build it. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. It fell endlessly, washing the city in gray, as if the sky itself wanted to cleanse what men like Hale had corrupted. Peter and I sat in that dim motel room, surrounded by fast food wrappers, empty coffee cups, and silence heavy enough to choke on. The flash drive sat in the center of the table like a ticking bomb, silent and deadly. "This little thing," Peter said, "staring at it, could bring down half the boardrooms in this city." "Yeah," I murmured, "if we live long enough to use it." I hadn't heard from Laura since that night. Every hour without word made the silence louder. Had she escaped? Was she caught? I didn't know, and that uncertainty gnawed at me like hunger. But I couldn't stop now if her sacrifice meant anything. It was this, that the truth had to come out, no matter the cost. By noon, I called Daniel Reeves again. He answered in a whisper. "Ethan, where are you?" "Safe enough for now. I have something, Hale's personal ledger. It's all there." There was a pause. Then he said quietly, "You need to bring it to me in person. The agency can protect you once it's verified." I frowned. You sure about that? Hale's got people everywhere. I know, he said. That's why you can't trust anyone else. Not the police. Not the press. Only me. Something in his tone felt off, to calm, to rehearsed. Where? I asked. Old Metro Warehouse, Dock 7, he said. Come after dark. Less attention that way. The call ended before I could say another word. Peter looked up from his chair. That didn't sound right. It didn't feel right either, I said quietly. But we don't have a choice. We left the motel just before sunset. The streets were slick and quiet. Neon lights reflecting in puddles like broken mirrors. Every sound, a passing car, a closing door, footsteps behind us, felt sharper than it should have. By the time we reached the docks, the city lights had faded into the distance. Only the hum of the bay and the creak of old metal filled the air, half lit, half forgotten. A single light flickered near the entrance. This feels wrong, Peter whispered. It's supposed to, I replied. Truth always feels dangerous. We stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and old oil. Empty crates lined the walls, and then, from the shadows, a figure emerged. Daniel Reeves, trenchcoat, calm smile, hands in his pockets. Ethan, he said softly, you made it. But something about his expression didn't fit his words. There was no relief, no warmth, only calculation. I kept my distance. You said you'd protect us, and I will, he said. Once we finish this, Peter frowned. Finish what? Daniel's eyes flickered toward the flash drive in my hand. Give it to me. I'll handle the rest. I hesitated. What agency do you work for, Daniel? He smiled faintly. You already know. Then he added, the same one that keeps men like Hale in power. Peter took a step forward. You're working for him. Daniel sighed. Working with him. Don't make it sound dirty. We all want the same thing, stability. The system can't afford chaos, Ethan. The files you have could ruin thousands of lives. I clenched my jaw. Good, his eyes hardened. You think you're bringing justice, but all you're doing is lighting a fire you can't control. He started walking closer, slow and confident. Give me the drive, he said. Walk away, start over. I can make sure no one touches you again. For a brief second, I almost wanted to believe him. But then I remembered Laura's trembling voice. They're tracking you right now. No, I said quietly. Not this time. I turned to Peter. Run? Daniel's eyes widened. Don't before he could finish. I threw the flash drive across the warehouse floor, sliding it into the shadows. Between metal crates, Daniel lunged forward. And in that chaos, Peter grabbed a nearby wrench, swinging it down to block him. The sound of metal hitting concrete echoed like thunder. We ran outside. The rain hit hard, drenching us in seconds. We sprinted across the docks, boots splashing through water, the sound of footsteps chasing close behind. Ethan, Daniel's voice shouted from behind. You can't hide the truth forever. I turned back once, saw him standing under the flickering light, furious. Helpless, neither can you, I shouted back. We made it to the other side of the docks, lungs burning. I looked down at my hands, empty. The drive, Peter gasped. Where is it? My heart sank. It was still inside for a moment. I wanted to run back, but then headlights cut across the road, black SUVs pulling into the lot. Hale's men, go. I shouted. We disappeared into the storm again, blending with the night. Hours later, we found shelter in an abandoned metro tunnel. The city above was quiet again. Too quiet, Peter leaned against the wall. So, now what? We lost it. I shook my head slowly. No, I made a backup. He looked at me, disbelief turning into a tired laugh. You never stop planning, do you? Not when the truth's this dirty. I pulled out a small encrypted memory card from my jacket. Every file, every name, every transfer. The drive was bait. This is the real one. Peter grinned weakly. You're insane, Ethan. Maybe, I said, but we're not done yet. I looked toward the tunnel's end, where faint light seeped in through cracks in the wall. Beyond that light was the city, still asleep, still blind. Tomorrow, they'd wake up. And when they did, I'd make sure they saw everything. Because once you've seen the truth, you can't unsee it. And once karma starts walking, there's no stopping where it goes next. The city woke up to a headline that felt like thunder. Investor Kingpin exposed Richard Hale under investigation. It spread like wildfire. Financial news, morning shows, think pieces. The ledger, the transfers, the secret accounts, everything spilled out into light. My anonymous upload had triggered an avalanche. I watched it all from the corner of a cheap cafe, hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, gone cold. Peter sat opposite me, flipping between tabs on his phone like a man trying to count his breaths. Each new article was a small hammer, striking at the gilded edifice Hale had built for decades. "Unbelievable," he muttered. "They're actually saying his name." It was unbelievable. Hale's face was on every screen, stern, shocked, trying to look smaller than he was. He'd always been a man who made the rules and expected them to be followed. He had friends at every level of power, favors owed like IOUs stacked to the ceiling. I had always known that bringing him down would mean chipping away at a mountain. I hadn't known how quickly the mountain would begin to crumble. Daniel called mid-morning. His voice was strained, but steady. "They've frozen Hale's accounts. A search warrant's been issued. Your files were crucial, Ethan. You did this." He didn't say we. He didn't need to. I heard the relief under the words, but also the warning. This wasn't the end. It was a door opening as the day went on. The dominoes fell. Board members resigned. Investors pulled funds. Hale's offices were swarmed by investigators wearing the kind of expression that means they've finally found what they were looking for. Mark, who had been a roaring figure 1 week ago, was a whisper now, a man in handcuffs, humiliated as cameras flashed. But the victory tasted oddly hollow. I should have felt triumph. Instead, there was a pressure behind my eyes, a quietness that felt like grief. I thought of how many lives would be shaken by this. Employees who might lose pensions. Families who'd suddenly have to explain missing retirement money. Justice doesn't rebuild everything, it breaks. It just balances scales. And sometimes the balance itself topples other things. Then there was Laura. Her name was in the ledger, an ugly ink stain that refused to wash away. News feeds speculated about her involvement, called her a conspirator, a mastermind, the woman who helped Hale launder money. Headlines asked whether she'd traded love for power. I felt each accusation like a stone thrown in my chest. Late that day, I received a message, a photo of Laura sitting on a bench in a park, hands clasped together, face buried in her palms. The caption said, simply, "She's cooperating." No name, no sender, just the image and the ache that followed. I wanted to run to her, to demand answers, to throw the ledger and the headlines at her and see what truth came out. But I didn't. Part of me wanted to keep the last threads intact until I knew what kind of person she had become. The other part, the smaller, more honest piece, feared the truth. By evening, investigators had questions for me. Daniel pressed and prodded, asking for timelines for proof of where I'd gotten the files, for every person who had helped. I answered, guarded but complete. I knew how fragile the legal world is. If I missed a fact, it could give them a lever to pull everything back into shadow. At midnight, the city's energy shifted. Protesters gathered near the North Point building, a crowd more complicated than celebration. Anger, betrayal, demand. People waved signs, not just at Hale or Mark, but at the whole system that let men like them flourish. A few nearby investors muttered on television about reforms. Politicians blinked under the lights. The tide had turned. For the first time in a long time, I felt the city itself breathe that night. In a tiny hotel room, hardly bigger than a closet, I finally allowed myself to think about consequences. Peter slept on the couch, exhausted. I lay awake, watching the ceiling like it was a map. The ledger had brought Hale down. It had shredded Mark. But the ledger had also implicated people I'd known, people who'd seemed loyal, neighbors who had trusted the system. I tried to tell myself the right things, that truth matters, that some things are more important than comfort, but the ache in my chest. Didn't care for platitudes. The call I feared came at dawn. Daniel's voice was softer than it had been. "We found Laura," he said. "She's in custody, but she's talking. She gave us a statement." My heart lurched. "What did she say?" "She says she was coerced," Daniel replied. "She says Hale threatened her family, her mother's medical bills. She says Mark promised to help, promised stability. She says she signed things without reading them, trusted the wrong man. The investigators are verifying her claims." I wanted to believe her. I wanted the story to be the one where love made a mistake and then clawed its way back. But the ledger showed signatures, timestamps, approvals. The truth had teeth, and sometimes those teeth cut both ways. They brought Laura in for questioning later that day. I watched the footage with a hollow focus. There she was, smaller than I remembered, eyes rimmed red, hands folded. She spoke in a voice that trembled with effort. She admitted to access to approvals, to being present in meetings where transfers were discussed. She admitted to fear. She denied malicious intent. People saw what they wanted to see. Some called her a victim. Others called her a traitor. The news split itself into opinion and outrage. I watched the clickbait and thought about the private moments that had led to that table. To that tape, the arguments, the silences, the nights where I had tried and failed to bridge a distance I now understood had been widening for some time. In the middle of the storm, something surprising happened. A handful of former North Point employees came forward. They spoke about Mark's manipulation, about a system that rewarded compliance and punished questions. Their names echoed in legal documents, their testimonies filling holes the ledger could not. Corruption, it turned out, was not just one man. It was a culture. Once you start pulling threads, more unravel. Hale's fall accelerated. The prosecutors moved quickly, fueled by public outrage and evidence that could not be easily dismissed. The arrests were broadcast in the late-night news, suits hurriedly put on, badges flashed, lawyers moving like chess pieces. I thought, for a fleeting second, that I could feel a balance tipping towards something like justice. But that thought was fragile. A week later, the court hearings began. The city sat in collective watchfulness. I attended a few sessions, of course, unobtrusively, a man in the gallery with a notebook and a face the world had decided was interesting. I listened to testimony. I watched lawyers frame narratives. Legalese cloaked human lives in clauses and precedent. That's how institutions speak. They prefer to abstract moral anger into policy. In one hearing, Laura testified. She spoke of fear, of bargains she made to save her mother. She spoke of how Mark had presented opportunity as love and coercion as loyalty. She admitted complicity, apologized in places she could, and painted a portrait of a woman trapped between survival and conscience. The courtroom murmured, after her testimony, I felt something open inside me and then close. Not forgiveness. Exactly. Not absolution. But an understanding that people are messy, that betrayal sometimes comes from the most ordinary choices, made under extraordinary pressure. When the jury finally returned, months later, after a slow, grinding display of the legal system's machinery, the verdicts were decisive. Hale was convicted on multiple counts. Mark faced his own fall from grace and legal consequences. North Point's board was restructured. Regulatory reforms were promised, and some were even enacted. The city celebrated a victory, however tempered. I didn't celebrate. I sat on a bench outside the courthouse, watching people flow past business people, journalists, families. Laura walked out later, flanked by an attorney. Our eyes met briefly, and the world contracted to that single look. She wanted to say something. I think she tried. We didn't speak. What now? Peter asked later that week, when we met at the old diner, both of us quieter men than we had been. I thought of all the things I'd lost, a job, a marriage, the illusion of a simple life. I thought of all the things that had been exposed, fraud, greed, cowardice, and then I thought of the small, fragile things that remain, a sunrise, a honest conversation, the possibility that someone could change. We forward the pieces, I said at last. We rebuild what we can. And we don't forget what let this happen. It wasn't a triumphant line. It wasn't a neat ending. It was a map for the next day, because karma had walked in that night, and it had done more than punish. It had shown me how crooked the ground was beneath my feet. The cost of justice is always complicated, and sometimes it asks us to carry the weight of losses we did not intend. As I walked home later, the city lights looked different, not brighter, but clearer. The truth had a way of clearing the air, but it also left a room to be cleaned. I wasn't sure I wanted to be the one to do it, but I knew I had to try. And I knew, deep down, that whatever came next would be quieter, more careful, and painfully honest. Months passed. Seasons shifted. The city found new stories to tell. And headlines moved on, as they always do. The scandal that once shook everything slowly became yesterday's noise. buried under newer dramas, fresher tragedies. But for me, it wasn't over. It couldn't be. Justice doesn't end with a verdict. It lingers like a faint bruise under the skin, reminding you what was broken to reach the truth. The return to ordinary, I moved to a smaller apartment overlooking the East River. The view was humble, just the water, a few boats, and the old skyline I used to dream beneath. Some mornings, I'd make coffee and watch the city wake up, wondering if the people walking below ever realized how much power hides behind glass towers. Peter came by sometimes. He'd bring bagels and sarcastic humor, pretending everything was normal. But even he carried the quiet weight of what we'd seen. "Funny thing," he said one morning. "Halfway through his second cup, you got everything they took from you. Your name cleared, their lies exposed. And yet, you don't look like a man who won." I smiled faintly. Maybe because winning isn't what I thought it would be. He didn't argue, just nodded, as if he already knew. Laura's lettre, a few weeks later, I got a letter, handwritten, no return address, just my name. Ethan Cole, written in familiar handwriting. I hesitated before opening it. Inside, the words were brief but heavy. Greater than Ethan, I'm leaving the city. The court let me go after cooperation, but I couldn't stay. Every street feels like memory, every face like judgment. You were right, truth matters, even when it hurts everyone. I wish I'd seen that sooner. Take care of yourself. And if you ever think of me, remember the woman who once tried to love you, right? Not the one who lost her way, Lee. Read it 3 times. Not because I expected new meaning to appear, but because I needed to feel every word settle in the spaces she once filled. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't closure. It wasn't enclosure. It was peace, the kind that doesn't erase pain, just helps you live alongside it. The meeting with Daniela, month after the final trial. Daniel Reeves invited me to his office. He looked older, tired, worn like the truth had taken something from him too. "You did good work, Ethan," he said. "We'll see changes come from this. Maybe not enough, but something." I nodded. And Hale, gone, officially bankrupt. His empire's being sold off, piece by piece. Some of it will go to restitution funds. He paused. "You could have taken credit, come forward, build your own name again." I looked out the window at the skyline. "I don't need fame, Daniel. I just needed balance." He smiled. "Balance is rare. Enjoy it while it lasts." The offer a few weeks later, an unexpected email landed in my inbox. A mid-sized firm, Ethical Consulting, of all things, had heard about the case indirectly. Wanted someone who understood integrity under pressure. Someone who'd seen corruption up close. I hesitated at first, but then I thought maybe this was the universe's quiet apology, not for the pain, but for the lessons, so I accepted. And on my first day, as I walked into that new office, I felt something strange, not triumph, not nostalgia, just calm, the kind that comes when you've been to the bottom and climbed out. Not spotless, but still yourself. The lesson sometimes, when I walk home at dusk, I pass by the old North Point building. It's under new management now, the logo replaced, the walls repainted, but I can still feel the ghosts of what happened there. Ambition, betrayal, justice. It taught me something I'll never forget, that revenge doesn't always need anger. Sometimes it just needs truth. That love can blind you, but loss can teach you to see that karma doesn't shout. It whispers in perfect timing. And that peace doesn't come when you win. It comes when you finally stop needing to. I stand by the water sometimes, watching the city lights flicker across the river. Each reflection trembles, breaks, reforms like life itself trying to stay whole. And in those moments, I whisper to the wind, not in regret, not in bitterness, but in quiet gratitude for the lesson that cost me everything, yet gave me back my soul.